Slack briefly broke below its $26 listing price in after-hours trading after the company posted weak bottom-line guidance. Joining us right now to talk about the company's first report as a public company is Rishi Jaluria. He is Senior Vice President and Senior Research Analyst at D.A. Davidson. Also, Dan Romanoff, who's an analyst at Morningstar. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Rishi, I know that you had been neutral on the stock kind of before any of this happened. What do you think after hearing the comments last night?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. Look, I'm still neutral on the stock, but it's primarily valuation based. I actually thought the results were pretty solid. There was a lot to like out of it. We saw growing momentum with large customers. I think we can talk about the revenue deceleration, but once you adjust for some one-time factors, it really wasn't that much of a deceleration at all. And we're starting to see kind of early evidence of traction outside of technology and technology-forward companies, which had always been a little bit of a concern of mine that this was a little bit more of a niche market, but clearly it's expanding to companies that you would not assume would actually become Slack customers. So I think all the metrics are pointing in the right direction, and I think I would say this is probably a little bit of an overreaction. If we thought the stock was fairly priced before, then there's no reason it should be trading down this morning. All
right, Dan, you are more bearish in the situation. You've got a price target of just $14 for the stock, which is last trading about $26.75. Maybe some of the biggest surprise is that the company didn't beat the expectations that it set when it was first launching as an IPO. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I just think it's a little difficult when you're newly listed to come out of the gate and maybe disappoint investors a little bit. If you're not sort of beating and raising in a clean manner, I think investors are going to have a tough time with that, especially when you're one of the most highly hyped up IPOs or direct listings in this case, in the last few years. So I just think that's a tough setup for them.
It's a tough setup, but maybe it just means they're not used to the silly game that companies play of setting the bar too low so they can step over it.
Yeah, I think you saw a couple of signs of that on the call, actually. The CEO stumbled a little bit when asked about the service outages. So, I think they're doing a fine job. I think it's more of a learning exercise for them. And, I think that they'll turn it around and address the little issues that they had.
Rishi, I think the bigger question probably is what Microsoft is doing. They're the biggest competitor. They've put out some numbers showing that they've got strong pickup, and maybe that's a bigger competitor to Slack than people had anticipated. What do you think from that perspective? What would you like to hear from Slack to clear up any questions on that?
Yeah, and look, I think my take on it is Microsoft's put out some numbers that sound really impressive, but let's take a step back and remember the fact that Microsoft Teams is a product that's being given away for free with Office 365, right? You get the cheapest version of it, you get Teams for free, and what they've actually started doing is having it start anytime you boot up your computer, Microsoft Teams loads. So when they put out that 13 million daily active users and you say, wow, that's bigger than Slack's 10 million.
You don't think people are actually using it?
I don't think that's active, right? And so I think the more important metric is the engagement metric, right? Slack, you see more than an hour and a half of active usage on Slack every workday. I would be very, very shocked if Microsoft Teams comes even close to that. And that, to me, is much more important, that where Slack has a huge advantage ahead of Teams.
What do you think Slack's ultimately worth?
I think the big question that behind that is the traction outside of tech. If we can see more of these big deployments like what we saw at the Fortune 100 financial services firm that they talked about on the call yesterday, then I think this has potential to be the next billion-dollar plus or multi-billion-dollar SaaS company. And then I think the stock is worth a lot more than it is today. But that is a big if, right? There's only been $1 billion SaaS plus SaaS companies in history.
Hey, Dan, you are not as bearish sounding when you're talking as your $14 price target is. You think that this company is in a position to really make something of itself? You think it's just explain $14 price target and what didn't sound like a truly pessimistic take on the company.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think we at Morningstar we call that a fair value estimate, and the problem that we run into is we're an ROIC model, so. I'm looking at what we're calling an economic moat, and this is a newly listed company, so I'm not sure that there's a giant moat here yet. There are definitely signs of some positive momentum. There's obviously very strong adoption. The metrics, while decelerating, I think were generally good. The results themselves were good. So to say that I'm bearish is maybe a little misleading. I think I was probably among the higher estimates for the quarter, which we don't emphasize so much. So and they beat even my estimates. So it was a good quarter by them. I would say, though, that we do have a little concern that, Microsoft is giving Teams away for free, and that's tough sledding. So, for example, last night when the CEO was saying we're not is concerned about monetizing and converting our free users to paid users. I think that is just a little stumble. I think investors don't necessarily want to hear that. And if you're concerned about your 500,000 free users, well, Microsoft is on 250 million desktops. So that's a pretty big funnel that you're going to have to overcome.